Hello everyone and welcome back to another video. Today I'm going to be talking a little bit about the meaning of life, or where life's meaning stems from, ultimately. And I'm just going to be generally discussing the religious view, the more nihilistic views, and just a general broad overview of the meaning of life. So just to start things off, I'm going to begin with this common argument that I hear from religious people, that without God, there's no meaning to life. And ultimately, I think that a lot of forms of atheism agree with this premise, and they once you break away from having a God prescribing meaning, then it's just, oh, there's no meaning to anything, and all it is just subjective whim, and your values are determined by your whims. And so I think ultimately that lack of an alternative form of meaning really led me to stick with religion at the time when I was religious. But I think ultimately the religious people are not only wrong on the fact that atheists can't have meaning, they also have a bad conception of what meaning actually means. So just from my discussions with religious people and seeing how religious people talk about meaning, they seem to have a very intrinsicist view of reality and of meaning. So like one person I was talking to essentially said that, okay, but your definition of meaning, if all humans were gone, there'd be no meaning to anything else. Like, what is that? That seems like a really depressing worldview. How is there any objective meaning in that? And I think just seeing the universe as having a meaning in and of itself, that's intrinsicism. That's an intrinsic view of meaning, and it's also a view that necessarily implies a God, because without some consciousness determining meaning, obviously it makes no sense that something could have meaning, because the idea of separating a meaning from a consciousness makes no sense, which is why when I pressed him on the issue a little bit and thought, well, if there's no humans, how can there be meaning? That he couldn't really explain it without there being a God, without there being some larger consciousness. So just the idea of teleology, the idea that everything in the universe or existence itself has meaning, that necessarily implies a God. Because, I mean, just the basic argument that you can't have values without a valuer, and the same way you can't have a meaning without meaning to something, meaning to someone, which is ultimately the role that God fills in this sense. So, ultimately, my view of meaning is just the general objectivist view, this idea that by our very nature our lives have meaning. It's not some whim of some higher power or something of that sort, which I view as less objective, because if it's more determined by some external source, it's not something built into our very nature, in the God view. So what my view of what meaning stems from, it's just the objective fact that you have certain requirements for your life, and you have certain requirements for what it means to be happy. There's this objective potential for happiness that every human being has just by being alive. That's why we live. We live so that we can have this potential to achieve happiness. And this is inbuilt into our nature, just by the fact that we're individuals who have the ability to pursue happiness and to achieve happiness by our own rational minds. Our minds, we look at the world, we decide principles that we should act upon, and these ultimately are with the goal of being happiness. This is the purpose of your life. And it is objective. It's not something that's subjective, because each individual person, there are certain values that are required that objectively lead to their survival and to their happiness. These are objective facts. It's the same thing with like a diet, for example. Let me elaborate more on the point that I was making. It's not something that is true apart from human beings. It's not something that's apart from human beings, not something that applies to everybody. It's something that is true for you, but it's still objective, because the values required for happiness are objective facts for you. It's a relationship between your mind and reality. It's not simply reality out there has meaning. That's not the way it works. It's the same thing as I was saying earlier, or as I started to go into earlier, with like a diet, because there's not one diet that works for every single human being just by human nature. There's obviously certain principles that are required by human nature for a diet. It's the same thing with meaning. Like there's certain values like rationality virtues, rationality, independence, integrity, all the values that Rand talks about, and there's like some more too that there's obviously more virtues like focus and sort of stuff that Rand doesn't explicitly mention, but we'll not go into that explicitly right now because it's not super important. But there's obviously values that are not super important for this discussion. It's very important stuff, but not important for this discussion. So there's obviously values that are required by human nature. But however, there's obviously differences in values because we're all individual human beings with our own different unique requirements, our own different minds, our own different everything. We're very different people. So it's similar to a diet. Let's go back to the diet example. Sorry, because I didn't actually elaborate on that like I wanted to. It's similar to a diet where you have where there's not one diet that suits everybody. You have a diet that works for you. And it's not subjective. You can't think, oh, I want to go eat this Big Mac over here, and that's going to be healthy because it's what I want. It's what I believe. That's subjectivism. There are actual requirements by your body for what food you need to ingest that will lead to your health, lead to a longer life, lead to all those sort of things. That's how a diet works. But it's different for every human being because we all have different bodies. We all have different requirements for health. So ultimately, it's this. There's obviously general principles, like I've mentioned before, but that's because of our human nature. And humans are also very similar. Although we're also very different, we have a human nature that gives us certain requirements that we have. But we're all different too. So we all have different value judgments. We all have different meaning in a sense. This is ultimately tying it back to meaning. Meaning is not whatever you make it, whatever your whims decide. But it's also not something completely apart from you that is like the ultimate meaning of the universe that each human being needs to fall in line with and follow God's plan. That's essentially the argument that people tend to make with that. Each human being is a different human being who has different requirements for happiness. So he should follow his own objective values, because these values are things that will actually lead to his happiness. That potential for happiness and life in general is absolutely key here, because these are facts of reality that have factual requirements. It's not whatever you feel like. That's the issue with subjectivism here. So that is why meaning and morality in general, too, values. This applies to just about everything with ethics. All this is objective. It's not intrinsic to reality, and it's also not subjective. It is objective. So yeah, that's all I have to say for today, guys. Thank you for watching, and I hope to see you guys in the next video. Peace.